The protracted conflict between Russia and Ukraine is entering a phase of extreme volatility and danger. As the balance of power on the battlefield incrementally shifts, the foundations of the international negotiating table are beginning to tremble behind the scenes. Notably, even Ukrainian defense analysts have been compelled to acknowledge a disquieting reality: Russia's escalating capability to interdict Ukraine's supply lines via unmanned aerial vehicles is emerging as the pivotal inflection point of the 2025 campaign. The localized territories, a handful of villages seized by Russian forces today, are not merely new cartographic coordinates. They represent kinetic strikes against Ukraine's operational lifeline, logistics corridors, ammunition depots, and critical supply routes are subjected to relentless attrition by Russian drone swarms, severely depleting Ukraine's combat resources, hemorrhaging everything from munitions and fuel to human capital. In strategic terms, Moscow now holds the leverage to asphyxiate Ukraine's defensive capacity as the tactical equilibrium on the battlefield tilts decisively in Russia's favor. The geopolitical ramifications are immediately palpable on the diplomatic front. Kyiv's negotiating posture has visibly eroded. In Washington, a high-stakes internal struggle is unfolding within the administration of President Donald Trump. Influential factions within his cabinet and advisory circle are openly advocating for a cessation of hostilities on terms that arguably favor Moscow. Their rationale is rooted in cold pragmatism. Ukraine should accede to a settlement now, while it retains a semblance of leverage. Should the conflict protract amidst a critical deficit of resources, the terms dictated to Kyiv in the future could be exponentially more punitive. Conversely, Kyiv and its European partners are attempting to execute a counter-strategy. They are lobbying President Trump to intensify coercive pressure on Russia, compelling Moscow to accept a more equitable settlement. Their objective is unambiguous: to prevent Ukraine from being relegated to a position of systemic weakness, both in the kinetic theater and at the negotiating table. Earlier, on November 30, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff convened with Ukrainian negotiators in Florida to deliberate on a Washington-sponsored roadmap to end the war. The Ukrainian delegation viewed this proposal as disproportionately tilted toward Russian interests. This refers to the controversial 28-point peace plan proposed by President Donald Trump, which currently sits at the epicenter of the diplomatic storm. To comprehend why the strategic narrative revolves around UAVs, one must revisit the war's nascent stages. At the onset of hostilities, Ukraine enjoyed a distinct asymmetric advantage in drone warfare, both tactically and technologically. For 2 years, UAVs served as a force multiplier, compensating for infantry shortages and significantly retarding the Russian advance across multiple critical axes. However, by this autumn, the pendulum had swung. Russian forces have achieved dominance in the tactical drone competition. They have secured quantitative superiority in key sectors, while simultaneously evolving their doctrine to strike directly at Ukraine's logistical arteries. This trajectory is viewed as profoundly detrimental to Ukraine's bargaining power and its capacity to sustain a defensive posture into 2026. It is not merely communication lines that are being degraded. The very concept of a Ukrainian safe rear is evaporating. Military experts observe that while Russia is ramping up pressure on the UAV front, it has yet to achieve a decisive strategic breakthrough. Nevertheless, the modern battlefield has been fundamentally transformed. Large-scale maneuvers have been rendered nearly obsolete, as swarms of inexpensive, expendable drones provide persistent surveillance and strike capabilities against any troop or vehicle movement. What Kyiv fears most is the prospect of attrition, exhaustion, should they fail to regain the initiative in this high-tech drone war. Throughout the conflict, Russia has intensified the proliferation of small-scale drones. These assets are deployed for reconnaissance, artillery spotting, fire control, and direct kinetic strikes against Ukrainian forward positions. Significantly, Russia overhauled its UAV doctrine in 2024. Following the Ukrainian incursion into the Kursk region, Moscow established a specialized unit designated Rubicon aggregating its most elite drone operators. The primary mandate of this unit is the systematic disruption of Ukrainian logistics within the Kursk theater. The Rubicon unit employs fiber-optic controlled UAVs, physically tethered to the operator via cable to render them immune to electronic warfare jamming. It was this persistent logistical interdiction that precipitated the rapid collapse of Ukrainian strongholds in Kursk, forcing a retreat in the spring of 2024. Following the Kursk campaign, Rubicon expanded operations to the Eastern Front, replicating these proven tactics while training other Russian drone cadres. According to Ukrainian field officers, Rubicon prioritizes medium-range high-value targets, typically located at least 19 kilometers behind the zero line, rather than focusing on frontline infantry. This unit is tasked with two primary objectives: dismantling Ukraine's logistics infrastructure and hunting Ukraine's own drone operator teams. Consequently, Ukraine's logistical units and UAV crews are sustaining higher casualty rates than the infantry entrenched on the front lines. This reality compels Ukrainian drone pilots to launch first-person view attacks from greater standoff distances, thereby degrading strike efficiency. In contrast, Russian UAVs, boasting superior operational ranges, are penetrating deep into Ukraine's operational rear. Experts note that Russia's combat experience is manifesting in its mid-range strike capability. They are precision-targeting assets 40 to 70 kilometers from the front. Meanwhile, Ukrainian FPVs remain active along the line of contact, but Kyiv lacks the appropriate munitions to strike deeper targets, such as logistical hubs, command posts, and strategic nodes. The danger zone is thus shifting aggressively behind Ukraine's front lines as Russia significantly enhances its long-range strike envelope. In addition to fiber-optic drones, Russian units have deployed fixed-wing Lancet loitering munitions with a range of up to 25 miles. These assets have afforded Russia a significant asymmetric advantage, not only on the battlefield but also at the negotiating table. It is within this context that the 28-point peace plan proposed by Washington has become increasingly contentious. Ukraine argues that numerous provisions disproportionately favor Russia, forcing Kyiv's negotiators to lobby the US for greater clarity and support. During the November 30 meeting in the Miami area, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff worked with the Ukrainian delegation on the 28-point draft. Both sides focused on revising and polishing the framework. The original draft, formulated during US-Russia back-channel negotiations, drew criticism for heavily favoring Moscow's maximalist demands. It envisioned a scenario wherein Ukraine would cede the entire Donbas region, accept stringent caps on military personnel, and be permanently barred from NATO accession. Negotiators indicate the plan has been revised, though specific details remain classified. The Miami summit aims to determine if the US and Ukraine can sufficiently reconcile their divergent positions. Should core issues be clarified, US envoys could proceed to the next round of shuttle diplomacy, with a more unified and viable proposal, potentially including a planned trip to Russia by Mr. Keith Kellogg later this week. A peace roadmap is being quietly drafted within the Trump administration, yet it does not rely entirely on traditional diplomatic channels. Instead, it leverages economic incentives and business opportunities. This strategy is described as the culmination of an approach the Kremlin had cultivated prior to Mr. Trump's inauguration, attempting to persuade Washington to view Russia as a frontier of economic potential rather than a military adversary. President Trump and his inner circle share a fundamental worldview. Borders are secondary to business. When a version of the 28-point plan leaked, it triggered immediate backlash. European and Ukrainian leaders complained that the plan primarily reflected Russian interests and violated nearly all of Kyiv's previously declared red lines. They feared Russia was being rewarded with commercial opportunities post-aggression. On a parallel front, Ukraine sought to demonstrate agency. Kyiv synchronized its sanctions regime with the US, simultaneously imposing additional restrictions on individuals involved in the Russian UAV industrial complex. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine continues to expand its sanctions architecture. He announced the ratification of 2 new decrees. As part of a synchronized package with the US, Ukraine is sanctioning 26 Russian legal entities in the energy sector. The second package targets 36 individuals and 13 entities linked to the production and operation of Russian UAVs, including those associated with the Rubicon Center, a facility that tests advanced weapons prototypes and directly participates in combat operations against Ukraine. From Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed cautious optimism regarding the US proposed peace initiative. However, recent rhetoric from his special envoys leads analysts to believe Moscow calculates it can secure a more favorable agreement by waiting. Despite intense diplomatic maneuvering and optimistic rhetoric, many experts remain skeptical regarding President Putin's readiness to accept an accord at this juncture or his willingness to embrace the necessary level of compromise. A crucial detail is that President Putin is believed to have successfully rebuffed the immediate ceasefire demand Trump reportedly made in Alaska in August 2025, while minimizing the risk of new US sanctions. Simultaneously, Russia continues to intensify frontline assaults and expand long-range strikes on Ukrainian cities and critical infrastructure as autumn sets in. Experts conclude that with each micro-victory, each captured village, each square kilometer seized, Moscow's position strengthens on both the battlefield and the negotiating table. Meanwhile, Ukraine faces not only direct pressure from the drone-infested skies and interdicted supply lines, but also mounting pressure from peace proposals that increasingly tilt toward Russia on the geopolitical chessboard. Thank you for tuning in to today's analysis. If you found this content insightful, please like and subscribe to follow our upcoming reports. See you in the next video.